Hi there. This is me again, Paul Glumaz, and today is the 6th of July, 2019. Actually, it's the 5th of July. Sorry about that. The 5th of July, 2019. And this is being brought to you by General Welfare Presents. Now, we had a very interesting situation. The president had a very large rally in Washington, D.C., filling up both sides of the Memorial Pool. And he gave about an hour presentation. And the media tried to downplay it as a failure to bring a big enough crowd, but when you look at the photographs of the whole thing, it looks pretty big. Nonetheless, the message that the president delivered was a message of promoting a concept of America as put forward in the Declaration of Independence, which was July 4th, 1776. Okay. And that part of the Declaration of Independence, which is very familiar to all, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, okay, and are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights. Okay. Now, that Declaration of Independence is and has been, so far in human history, the greatest revolutionary statement ever in human history. And up until that declaration was issued, regardless of how beneficent, regardless of how decent various republics, kingdoms, empires, civilizations have been, nowhere is it stated this conception of man. The conception of man as a human being with unalienable rights. This is revolutionary. And the context in which this was said was in the context of a 150-year effort by those who came to primarily the northern part of what was then the colonies, the British colonies, to establish cultures and civilization outside the control of European aristocracy and European oligarchy, where people, the average person, could, through industry and education and development, pursue not only the economic benefits of the fruits of their labor, but also pursue happiness. Happiness means development. Happiness means an improvement in one's understanding of the world. Happiness means pursuing those things that give future generations, that can be given to future generations. So this idea, this concept, which is given birth as the basis of an actual republic, as the basis of an actual government, which later codified with the Constitution, with flaws, of course, but nonetheless, this is revolutionary. And whether people realize it or not, whether you live in Africa, or whether you live in India, or whether you live in China, or whether you live in Russia or Europe, or Latin America, that is the underlying driver of world history. That aspiration, that desire of every human being to be free from feudalism, slavery, colonialism, etc., economic poverty, etc. That's the driver. And no government can truly govern, except temporarily, if they do not demonstrate an intention to their populations that that is the direction they want to go in. Whether it's run by the Communist Party or whether it's run by some other entity, this is the issue that you have to answer. Or whether it's Putin in Russia or whatever. This is what you have to answer if you want to maintain. If you want to maintain what you might say the mantle of heaven, as in Confucius, and unless you can do that, you do not have a stable society. You do not have stability. You don't have a future. And the vehicle for that is the sovereign nation. But the form of the principles that govern the sovereign nation is contained in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And it's very important. However, that fundamental philosophical global empire that disagrees with this, that believes that human beings are not equal, that believes that human beings do not have unalienable rights, has been growing under the guise of the City of London financial system, with the establishment of non-national, supranational institutions and corporations and international criminal syndicates. And lastly, the environmental mafia. These organizations do not recognize the existence of the nation as the vehicle for the aspirations of the people. Rather, they see the existence of the nation as the enemy to their global empire. And that global empire has sought to keep the United States in constant conflict with the Soviet Union and China and later Russia. This is the essence of geopolitics. It's the essence of religious wars, constant conflict. Constant conflict is the essence of why? Because no one nation, no matter how powerful, no matter how strong, has the means to defeat this global monster. Just like Benjamin Franklin and George Washington could not defeat the British without a coordinated intervention and support from the League of Armed Neutrality, which included France and Russia especially. Similarly, the United States cannot free itself from this destructive, degenerate destruction of our society without a similar League of Armed Neutrality, which would be Russia and China working with us to defeat this empire. Now, what most people listening to this, or most people who are not going to be listening to this, which is do not understand, is that when Donald Trump walked across the armistice demarcation line of the since 1953 in between North and South Korea, he walked out of the prison of geopolitics, of the old paradigm, into the potential new paradigm of nations cooperating with each other to defeat this empire and set up a system to fulfill the aspirations of the people as expressed most cogently in the Declaration of Independence. That is at the center of world history today. Now, this was no accident. What Donald Trump did was completely coordinated with North Korea, was completely coordinated with Russia, China, and the two Koreas. The president of South Korea, Moon Jae-in, is saying essentially that the hostility that has governed that region since the Korean War and during the Korean War and beyond the Korean War, the 60, 68, 69, 70 years, has now informally ended. In the last 2 years, Kim Jong-un, the president or the leader of North Korea, has been preparing 20 special economic zones for companies, U.S. companies, Chinese companies, South Korean companies, other nations' companies, to come in and begin to utilize for production, for manufacturing, the relatively high-skilled labor and disciplined labor force of North Korea. This is huge. And the issue really isn't the nuclear weapons. North Korea can give up its nuclear weapons if their peace is guaranteed. And the Chinese and the Russians have played a role in guaranteeing their peace. That's not the issue. The issue is this collaboration between Russia, the United States, and China is at the center of this situation. Now, most people don't realize that while the United States did not send any official delegation to the June 4th to 6th conference in St. Petersburg, which is called the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, the delegation, the U.S. business delegation, was the largest of any delegation of all nations ever. Why would such a large delegation of U.S. businessmen go to St. Petersburg when Russia's facing all these sanctions? It's because they believe that the relationship between Russia and the United States is going to improve to the point that these businessmen can go into Russia and begin to develop Russia, and with tremendous profit to these businessmen. Now, Donald Trump, at the G20 meeting last week, did make a penultimate point that trade with Russia is key, that the U.S. and Russia should become major trading partners. Okay. Meanwhile, what's going on? You have a Russian submarine being sunk. You have Iran being attacked. You have Iran being blamed for tankers being attacked in the Gulf. You have a Iranian tanker being seized by British Marines off of Gibraltar. You have all these things going on simultaneously, which are designed to completely disrupt and provoke a disruption of this process. And you have the U.S. Congress committed to disrupting the peace process of Donald Trump. Last year, they passed a bill called the McCain bill, which was the Defense Authorization Act, and National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA, which granted the right of certain sections of U.S. military to conduct operations without informing the president, mainly in clandestine operations and cyber warfare. In other words, the president is not really in control, completely in control. Now, during the G20 meeting, and following that, Trump's visit to South Korea and walking across into North Korea, John Bolton was in Mongolia. He was sent to Mongolia to meet with the security chief there. The person who was with him was none other than Tucker Carlson, the Fox commentator, Fox NBC journalist. I mean, the Fox journalist. So you have to ask yourself, what's going on here? Yes, there is a dual power situation. There is a rebellion against Trump from within the institutions. But all of this is not going through the institutions. Trump must be working with others outside of the government to make all these things happen. So you have a dual power system. You have the government that is the bureaucracy that's in insurrection against the president, and the president's operating outside of the U.S. government, obviously. So we have one government, and we have the second potential government, which is the potential government of Donald Trump, which is what will be fully consolidated only after the 2020 election. So this is the context in which things are going on. Now, China's Belt and Road is growing, and dramatically. Turkey is shifting into it. Pakistan is shifting into it, already shifted. India is shifting into it. And the issue of Iran is the other one. You had the issue of Korea. Now you have the issue of Iran. And people are wondering, what the hell is going on with Iran? Why is Iran the bad guy? Okay. Well, Kim Jong-un was the bad guy from North Korea. Why was Kim Jong-un the bad guy? Because by maintaining that constant threat of nuclear war, or constant threat of war in North Korea, one, U.S. troops can stay in Japan and South Korea and the Pacific. Number two, this is the justification for the United States to establish in Japan and South Korea the THAAD missile system, which actually has a dual purpose. It can be used to defend against North Korean missile attacks, but it can also be used to set up China for a first strike, and Eastern Russia. Similarly, in Iran, the issue of Iranians' alleged nuclear program, bomb program, nuclear missile program, alleged, was the justification for setting up in Poland and Romania the ABM systems and the other systems to go with it that also give the U.S. a war-winning, a nuclear first strike capability. And that's why the U.S. moved out of the ABM treaty back in the early part of, during the Bush administration, Bush Jr. administration, because they were preparing to win a nuclear war. And that has been U.S. policy since George Bush. And Obama Jr. has been a preemptive nuclear war winning strategy. That's where all our money's been going into, these designing new nuclear new smaller missiles and systems to win a nuclear war. And of course everyone understood this. So if you have a peace with Iran, if you have the similar kind of process with North Korea occurs with Iran, then you don't have any official justification for having this threat against Russia put in Poland and Romania. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that the Persian Gulf, or border, which is the Gulf of Hormuz and all of this, you have most of the oil for India, almost all the oil for China, almost all the oil for Asia goes through that. Provoking Iran and closing the straits will have a consequence to these countries. It will not affect the oil supply of the United States, which is now the world's major oil, but it will affect the supply of all those countries in Asia, which are now involved in economic growth and development with respect to the Belt and Road. So this constant threat to blow up this region is the threat being used to try to force these countries to agree to submit to the financial structures that they don't want to submit to. So that's the second thing involving Iran. It's very important. to understand that. The third thing is that if you're going to connect the Belt and Road from India through Pakistan, you have to go through Iran into Turkey, into Europe. Also, you have to go to Iran to go down into to Israel or to Palestine or Saudi Arabia, down into Africa, Yemen, into Africa. So the Belt and Road has to go through Iran. If you prevent any kind of peace with Iran, you essentially have an effective, or if you can get Iran isolated so that they won't trade with these other countries. So this is the third thing. The fourth thing is that the Iranian leadership, which are the clerics, led by Ayatollah Khamenei, they have a somewhat fatalistic martyr syndrome. And the more you threaten them, the more it confirms to their religious martyrdom syndrome. So people who are saying you put the squeeze on them, you put the squeeze on them, you put the squeeze on them, they're gonna eventually come to the table. It's actually gonna have the opposite effect, because you're playing into this religious martyrdom mentality. So it's the worst thing you can do with Iran is to try to pressure them into coming to the table, or to do it because it just goes against the very nature of their religious beliefs, which are end times, which they have a very strong end times religious belief. So that's the fourth thing. The fifth thing is that Iran is a Shia country, and the Bernard Lewis plan for the Middle East was all based on creating these religious wars between Shias and Sunnis. And so that's the fifth thing. If you end that, then you don't have the basis for destroying the Middle East anymore, for creating international terrorism and so forth. So the Iranian situation is very key in this. And of course, Israel has committed itself under Bibi Netanyahu to a disintegrated Middle East, where they essentially have power and other nations don't. However, there's shifts going on dramatically in the Middle East, and one of them is Turkey. Turkey is now shifting into the purchase of Russian S-400s, air defense system. And the Russians are now coming out with a new air defense system called S-500s, which is even superior. Now, these air defense systems China has them, India is buying them. These air defense systems essentially neutralize the air power of the United States that has been developed in their projection of these carriers. These aircraft carriers go out into these areas. They're floating arsenals with bombers and fighter planes, and they essentially have been being neutralized by the institution of Russian air defense system, so that any effort to do what they did to Libya, or what they did to Serbia, or what they did elsewhere from the air will be met catastrophically by the most modern air defense system. So this has changed the military, on-the-ground military situation dramatically. So now the British are now deploying with their assets in the United States for massive color revolutions all over the world. They have these demonstrations in Hong Kong. There's stuff going on all over Africa. There's stuff going on in Asia. There's stuff going on, especially in the area of the Caucasus, and the stans, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan. They have these color revolutions being set, and these are understood to be hybrid warfare. So the warfare against these countries has not stopped just because Donald Trump is president and just because Donald Trump walked across. But the process of consolidating an ability for these three major nations, Russia, China, and the U.S., to work together in the coming crisis, which is coming. And that crisis is financial. The London-based offshore global financial system, which underlying issues were not resolved in 2008, that system is going to go. And people are going to lose their stock values, their pension portfolios, and so forth and so on. That's a given. But the question is, will a government exist to deal with the crisis and bring about with other nations a new agreement, a new architecture that will then allow for a massive increase in the real physical economic development of the world, and especially the United States? And that is really going to be the key issue facing Trump. Now, but Trump is not enough, and this is the whole point. My experience is that all of these things, the groundwork was laid starting in 1976 by Lyndon LaRouche. All the things that Trump will have to do, the groundwork has been laid by Lyndon LaRouche. Just like China's Belt and Road, the groundwork was laid by Lyndon LaRouche. And therefore, perhaps the most important thing to further the process by which Trump can actually deal with the crisis is to have the exoneration of Lyndon LaRouche. And I'm saying that's the missing ingredient in this equation, is the exoneration of Lyndon LaRouche.